This is a map of Italy, and this is also a map of Italy, and this one as well. The difference between these three maps is just 11 years. So how did Italy go from this to this? In this video, I'll walk you through it, step by step. What can you tell me about the unification of Italy? I'm fairly certain most people don't really know how it actually happened. It happened, and that's it. But what if I told you this process was wrapped in political intrigue, betrayal, and a chain of wars, one after another? Before we begin, I want to ask you to support the video with a like and a comment so I can keep making these kinds of stories. Today, the country faces many problems, conflicting interests, political instability, and more. But what if most of these issues pale in comparison to what existed in the 19th century? The idea of Italy as a geographical region dates back to the post-Roman era. It persisted through feudalism, the Middle Ages, and into the early modern period. But the idea of Italy as a politically unified state only truly emerged in the 19th century. The French Emperor, Napoleon, after conquering numerous Italian states, laid the foundation for what would eventually become modern Italy. After his campaigns, northwestern Italy was integrated into the French Empire. Meanwhile, the northeast proclaimed itself the Kingdom of Italy, with Napoleon as its king. But during the Congress of Vienna, the map was redrawn. Italy was once again fragmented, divided between multiple states. And yet, the national idea did not disappear. Memories of freedom fueled constant uprisings, movements that in time would lead to the Revolution of 1848, and, eventually, unification. By the 1840s, Italy was little more than a geographical term. The economy struggled. Feudal habits still lived in people's minds. There was no unified market. Borders, customs, checkpoints, even between neighboring kingdoms. Trade was difficult. Development, nearly impossible. And on top of it all, Italy was treated like a punching bag by the great European powers. January 12, 1848. This is where the roots of unification begin. The revolution started with a popular uprising in Palermo. A provisional government took power, and Sicily suddenly declared to all of Europe that it existed. The effect was contagious. Italy was shaken. Uprisings erupted everywhere. At the same time, in Austrian-controlled Italy, revolutionaries began using effective tactics to undermine Austrian finances. Then, on March 24th, Piedmont declared war on Austria. The war sparked enormous enthusiasm across the country. Volunteers poured in from everywhere. They rallied under the Piedmontese banners. Soon, even the rulers of Italian states were dragged into the conflict, against their own will. Troops were sent against Austria from Tuscany, Naples, even Rome. But at the same time, while fighting Austria, the Italian states began fighting each other. The war started falling apart, and in the end, Piedmont stood almost alone against Austria. At its head, Charles Albert. By 1849, 3 new Republican states appeared on the map of Italy. The Republicans dreamed of war against an external enemy and of national unity. On March 12, 1849, the King of Sardinia, Charles Albert, seeking to redeem his past failures, broke the truce with Austria unilaterally and declared war again. But just 11 days later, after defeat at the Battle of Novara, he abdicated in favor of his son, Victor Emmanuel II, and fled into exile. From 1852 onward, the foreign policy of Piedmont was led, almost continuously, by Count Cavour. His goals were not purely about unifying Italy. More often, they were about expanding Piedmont's own territory at the expense of other Italian states. In 1855, seeking to strengthen ties with France, Cavour intervened in the Eastern War, a conflict that had little to do with Sardinia itself. He sent a 15,000-strong court to Sevastopol. This gave him the right to participate in the Paris Congress, where he presented the needs of Italy. But in the end, it brought no real benefit to the national cause. In August 1858, at a meeting in Plombières between Cavour and Napoleon III, a secret agreement was reached. Napoleon promised to declare war on Austria, and after victory, to transfer Lombardy and Venice to Piedmont. In return, he would receive Savoy and Nice. But there was a condition. Fearing that Piedmont might grow too strong, Napoleon insisted on reshaping central Italy. Part of the Papal States would be added to Tuscany, forming a new kingdom. A kingdom meant for his cousin, Jerome Bonaparte. This plan had very little in common with the goals of Italian patriots. If fully realized, it would have delayed unification for years. Meanwhile, revolutionary unrest across Italy did not stop. It showed itself in a wave of political assassinations and attempted killings. By April 1859, war between Piedmont and Austria became inevitable. Just months earlier, Napoleon had hesitated. He tried to negotiate between Austria and Piedmont, seeking an outcome that would benefit himself as well. At the same time, in Tuscany, a revolutionary government overthrew the Grand Duke. They offered Victor Emmanuel II, dictatorial powers for the duration of the war. The Dukes of Modena and Parma fled. Romagna broke away from the Papal States. Everywhere, the people demanded one thing. What? Union with Piedmont. The government of Victor Emmanuel accepted temporary control. It sent its commissioners, but it avoided making firm commitments. It did not want to provoke Napoleon. Then, July 11, 1859. After the victory at Solferino, Napoleon met personally with Franz Joseph in Villafranca. There they signed the preliminary peace terms. France was leaving the war, not before securing the territories promised to it. Meanwhile, in Tuscany, Modena, Parma, and Romagna, a pro-Sardinian state had formed, under the overall command of Garibaldi. They declared their intention to join Piedmont, and were ready to continue the fight. From August 1859 to March 1860, the Kingdom of Sardinia annexed these territories, following plebiscites, under the terms of the Treaty of Zurich with the Austrian Empire. Lombardy was officially transferred to the Kingdom of Sardinia. Around the same time, Victor Emmanuel was urged to launch a revolutionary expedition. The goal, to annex the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and then march on Rome. He refused. But in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, since 1849, resentment had been quietly building. Hatred toward the Bourbon rule grew stronger. The regime stood on bayonets and fear. But patience was running out. On April 3, 1860, an uprising broke out near Palermo. It began to spread across Sicily and beyond. Then, in the night of May 5th to 6th, a force of 1,000 volunteers, led by Garibaldi, set sail for Sicily. They went to aid the rebels. This expedition was not officially sanctioned by the Piedmontese government, so, to avoid accusations of disobedience, Garibaldi acted in the name of Victor Emmanuel II, under the flag of the Kingdom of Sardinia. Italy and Victor Emmanuel became the slogan of his volunteers. In Sicily, he was welcomed with enthusiasm. Armed and unarmed peasants alike joined him in masses. On May 15th, the 1,000, now grown to around 1,500 men, met a Neapolitan force of 3,000 soldiers under General Francesco Landi at Calatafimi. During the battle, Garibaldi spoke the words that would become legendary. "Here we either make Italy or we die." 2 weeks after landing, he captured Palermo. Garibaldi proclaimed the overthrow of Francis II and declared himself dictator of Sicily. By August 1st, his forces, now around 20,000 strong, controlled the entire island. Yet despite acting in the name of Victor Emmanuel II, Garibaldi did not rush to hand Sicily over to the Kingdom of Sardinia. Tensions began to rise between him and Cavour's representative, Giuseppe La Farina. La Farina had been sent to prepare the annexation of Sicily, but Garibaldi, ever the skilled politician, had his own reasons for delaying it. "Let us first conquer all of Italy, and only then unite it." On August 19th, Garibaldi, this time with the approval and even support of the Piedmontese government, landed on the mainland in Neapolitan territory. He came ashore at the port of Melito, in Calabria. On August 21st, he captured the port city of Reggio di Calabria after a battle. This secured control over the Strait of Messina, allowing reinforcements to be transferred from Sicily for the advance on Naples, the Bourbon capital, leaving his forces in Salerno. On September 7th, Garibaldi entered Naples, accompanied by only a few officers. The day before, King Francis II had fled to Capua. The fort still held an 8,000-strong garrison, but any thought of resistance had already been abandoned. Garibaldi entered the city to the enthusiastic cheers of its people. Preventing the capture of Rome and Venice by directly attacking Garibaldi was either impossible or too risky. So Napoleon made a decision. He agreed that Victor Emmanuel would take control of the conquest of the papal territories, on one condition: Rome itself would remain under the Pope. To avoid suspicion of betraying the Pope, Napoleon briefly broke diplomatic relations with Sardinia. Between September 26th and October 2nd, Garibaldi defeated a larger army under General Giosuè Ritucci at the Battle of the Volturno. On October 16th, Neapolitan forces at Peterano defeated a volunteer detachment led by Colonel Francesco Nullo. But this success did not change the overall course of the war. Garibaldi planned, after the final defeat of Francis II, to march on Rome. But Cavour and Victor Emmanuel II saw the danger. An attack on the Papal States and the seizure of Rome could destabilize Sardinia's international position. It would provoke Napoleon III, who personally protected Pope Pius IX. So, instead, a regular Sardinian army was sent south under the command of Victor Emmanuel II and General Enrico Cialdini. On September 18, Cialdini defeated the papal forces of General Christophe de la Mauricière at Castelfidardo. By September 29th, Ancona had capitulated. Sardinian troops occupied the eastern part of the Papal States, the Marche and Umbria. North and South Italy were now effectively connected. Only Lazio remained under papal control, a small territory around Rome. On October 21st, referendums were held in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, in territories controlled by Garibaldi. The result: the kingdom became part of the Kingdom of Sardinia. Austria, Prussia, and Russia protested. They called it a robbery of the Bourbons and the Pope. But in the end, they accepted the new reality. On October 26th, in Campania, near the town of Teano, Garibaldi met Victor Emmanuel II. A moment that would become symbolic. The leader of the volunteers laid down his dictatorial powers and transferred authority in southern Italy to the Sardinian king. On October 29th, Victor Emmanuel II and General Cialdini defeated Francis II at the Battle of the Garigliano River. Francis fled to Gaeta. On November 4th, following a vote, Marche and Umbria were officially annexed into the Kingdom of Sardinia. On November 5th, Cialdini began the siege of Gaeta. Blockaded from the sea by Vice Admiral Pisano, the city held out until February 13, 1861. Then, it capitulated. After the fall of Gaeta, Francis II and his wife, Maria Sophia of Bavaria, departed for Rome. On March 17, 1861, the Kingdom of Sardinia was officially renamed the Kingdom of Italy. On March 20th, the garrison of Civitella del Tronto surrendered. It had resisted since October of the previous year. Active military operations were now over, but the story did not end there. Until 1870, southern Italy remained unstable. Armed clashes continued between royal troops, rebellious peasants, supporters of Francis II, and criminal bands. On February 18, 1861, a parliament was convened in Turin, representing all of United Italy. On March 14th, Victor Emmanuel accepted the title King of Italy. And 10 days later, Parliament declared Rome the future capital of Italy. This placed Italy in an openly hostile relationship with the Holy See. The loss of Savoy and Nice was reluctantly accepted by the people, but the national cause was far from complete. As long as Pius IX ruled in Rome as a king, and a foreign monarch remained in Venice, Italy could not consider itself whole. Yet the Italian government had too much on its hands to begin another war. Finances were in disarray. The state was burdened with enormous debt. The newly annexed territories only made things worse. Their economies were even weaker, their debts just as heavy. The king refused the services of Giuseppe Garibaldi, who in 1860 had hoped to become temporary governor of southern Italy. His legion was dissolved. But unrest did not fade. In 1862, Garibaldi launched a new expedition. He landed in Palermo, crossed to the mainland, and marched toward Rome with volunteers. The king responded sharply. He denounced Garibaldi as a rebel and sent troops to stop him. At the foot of Aspromonte, Garibaldi's forces were defeated. He was wounded, captured, and soon released. The movement was crushed. At the same time, the government pursued Rome through diplomacy. They hoped to achieve, without war, what they could not yet seize by force. Their first goal was the withdrawal of French troops still protecting the papal capital. At last, the issue was settled by the September Convention of 1864. Under its terms, Napoleon III agreed to withdraw French forces from Rome, gradually, over 2 years. In return, the Pope would be allowed to form his own army. Italy would promise not to attack, and even defend him from external threats. And most critically, Italy would abandon all claims to Rome and move its capital from Turin to Florence. The reaction was explosive. Across Italy, anger spread. In Turin, it turned into open revolt. The uprising was suppressed, harshly. Unrest continued into early 1865, yet despite this, the king, with parliament approval, relocated to Florence on February 3rd. Another step toward unification came with the help of Prussia and Otto von Bismarck. When Bismarck prepared for war against Austria, he sought Italy as an ally. On April 8, 1866, an alliance was signed between Prussia and Italy. Peace with Austria could only be concluded jointly, and in advance, Bismarck promised Italy Venetia. In reality, Italy's participation in the war was unnecessary. Austria, aware of the agreement, offered Venetia without war, simply to pull Italy away from the alliance. But Italian diplomacy failed. Minister Alfonso La Marmora later explained that breaking the treaty would have been dishonorable, and so, Italy entered the war. The Austro-Prussian War was a failure for Italy. Even with Garibaldi and his volunteers, Italian forces struggled. Generals quarreled among themselves, and while Prussia advanced victoriously toward Vienna, Italy suffered defeat after defeat. at Battle of Custoza on June 24th, and at Battle of Lissa on July 20th, on land and at sea. Yet despite these losses, Austria ceded Venetia to Napoleon III, who then transferred it to Italy. On October 3rd, a peace treaty was signed in Vienna between Italy and Austria. Venetia became Italian. By the end of 1866, France withdrew its final troops from Rome, ending a 17-year occupation. But just a year later, Garibaldi returned. He gathered volunteers once more and marched on Rome again. This time, a French corps was immediately sent back. Together with papal forces, they defeated Garibaldi on November 3, 1867, at the Battle of Mentana. Garibaldi himself was captured and exiled to the island of Caprera. French troops remained to guard the papal territories. This, along with suspicions that Garibaldi had acted with the quiet approval of the king, led to a cooling of relations between Napoleon and Victor Emmanuel II, between France and Italy. Tensions deepened when Napoleon III began searching for allies for an approaching conflict with Prussia. But in Italy, he found no willingness to support him, not even when he promised to withdraw the French garrison from Rome. When the Franco-Prussian War began, the Italian government at first intended to honor the September Convention. But then, everything changed. The disaster at Battle of Sedan on September 2, 1870, and the withdrawal of French troops from Rome freed Italy's hands. An observation corps was deployed at the border. Garibaldian commander Nino Bixio seized Civitavecchia. At first, the government tried persuasion. They urged the Pope to voluntarily abandon temporal power, but he refused. Then, on September 20th, government forces began the bombardment of Rome. Inside the city, several thousand papal troops held their ground. They were joined by volunteers and irregular fighters from the Abruzzi. 3 hours of cannon fire was enough. They surrendered to a far stronger enemy. A provisional government was established in Rome. Papal forces were disbanded. Foreign mercenaries expelled from Italy. On October 3rd, a plebiscite was held on the question of unification with Italy. Out of 167,000 eligible voters, 135,600 cast their ballots. 134,000 voted in favor. Only 1,507 voted against. On October 9th, the annexation was made official. On January 26, 1871, the Parliament decreed that the capital would be moved to Rome. Only a few lands remained outside: Savoy and Nice, already ceded to France, and Trieste, Istria, and South Tyrol, still under foreign rule. Against this, the supporters of irredentism continued to protest. After unification, Italy entered the system of European powers, formed after the Congress of Vienna. It was often called the least of the great powers. And then, what came next was something entirely different: the uprising in Milan in 1898. The First Italo-Ethiopian War, and the assassination of Umberto I. But that is another story.